I never cared much about hair until people started selling it to a stranger in white. Our village isn't the sort you'd find on postcards. It's a flat smudge in the middle of Vietnam's rice belt, sweltering and damp half the year, bone dry the rest. The only things that grow well here are water spinach and resentment. People gossip like hens and carry their grandparents' grudges without ever asking why. I don't blame them. There's little else to do. I work at my uncle's barber shop, if you could call it that. It's really just a wooden shack with a cracked mirror, 2 rusted chairs, and a fan that makes more noise than wind. Still, it's one of the busiest spots in the village. Men come for haircuts, women come to gossip, and kids come to steal candy from the counter when Uncle Hi isn't looking. I sweep the floors, hold the mirror, sharpen the shears. It's not glamorous, but it pays for rice and phone credit. That week, the heat was thick like boiled tar. Even the chickens walked slow. My cousin Lynn, who was just turning 19, had been helping out too, mostly trimming split ends and laughing too loud at customers' jokes. She had this long, shiny black hair that she refused to cut. Every night she brushed it in long strokes with a comb our mother passed down to her, and every morning she tied it back with a red cloth band. She was proud of it, said it made her feel like she belonged to something older than all of us. Then she sold it. The woman came in just after the rain started that Monday. She wasn't local. We'd have known her. She wore a white shawl over her head, long enough to drag through the puddles on the ground, and walked in sandals like someone who didn't mind the mud between her toes. She didn't speak at first, just stood outside the barber shop under the overhang, watching. I remember thinking she looked too clean for this village, too still. She waited until Uncle Hyde finished with his last customer, then stepped inside. The way she moved, slow and careful, like each step had to be thought through, made the hairs on my neck stand up. She didn't sit. She didn't take off the shawl. She didn't even introduce herself. She opened a pale leather bag and laid out small bundles of cash neatly tied in rubber bands. "Long hair," she said softly, like she hadn't used her voice in years. "Black only, past waist, natural." Uncle Hy didn't say anything at first. He looked at the money, then at me. I shrugged. Customers asked for strange things sometimes. But the woman wasn't offering to buy extensions or wigs. She wanted real hair, local hair, village girl hair. Freshly cut and untouched. "For what?" Uncle Hy finally asked, his voice rough from a lifetime of cigarettes. She didn't answer, just tapped her fingers on the cash and said, "Triple rate." Triple was no small thing. Most girls could sell their hair for a few $100,000 dong if they were lucky. This woman was offering over $1 million, cash in hand, for one cut. Uncle Hy looked tempted. He asked who she worked for. No reply. He asked if she had a license. Nothing. She just stared at him, then down at her own hands. They were pale. Not sickly pale, more like unused, like they hadn't done labor in years. Her fingernails were long and square and clean. They didn't look like they belonged to someone from here. Lynn came in halfway through the standoff, holding a soaked umbrella and cursing the rain. The woman turned immediately and stared at her, or, more specifically, at her hair. "I'll do it," Lynn said after 5 seconds. "Don't be stupid," I told her. She grinned. "It's just hair. It grows back." I started to argue, but Uncle Hy nodded toward the woman's bundles of cash. We needed money. Lynn had dropped out of school to care for our sick mother. $1 million dong was more than she made in a month washing clothes and cutting split ends. "Go get the good shears," Uncle Hyde told me. When I came back with the steel scissors, something strange happened. The woman pulled away. She didn't flinch, just leaned slightly back, like the sight of the blades offended her. She took a piece of folded cloth from her bag and laid it on the armrest between her and Lynn. "No metal," she said. Uncle Hy looked confused. "What else am I supposed to use? My teeth?" She didn't laugh, didn't blink, just stared at him, and somehow, without speaking again, she made it clear she would not accept the cut if it was done with metal. So Uncle Hy went digging and came back with an old bamboo blade used for splitting rattan. It wasn't sharp, but it wasn't metal. The woman nodded. Lynn sat down, looking a little less sure of herself now. The woman reached forward and gently touched the ends of Lynn's hair. I noticed again how she didn't use her nails, only the tips of her fingers. She never touched Lynn's skin. The cut was slow, painfully slow. The bamboo blade tugged and caught, and I could see Lynn wincing even though she tried to hide it. Still, when the long, thick rope of hair finally came loose and was handed over, the woman wrapped it immediately in rice paper and tied it shut with red string. She paid an exact change, and she walked out the same way she came, without saying goodbye. That should have been it, a weird visitor with a creepy vibe and too much cash, but word spread fast. By the next morning, girls from all over the district were lining up in front of the shop. Some were from the next village over, some came in pickup trucks from farther north. Every one of them had long black hair and desperation in their eyes. Every one of them wanted the money. The woman came back around noon. She stood outside, waiting, never speaking unless it was to confirm a price or shake her head. She refused to enter the shop. She never stepped on the concrete slab. She would gesture for the girl to come outside, inspect the hair with her fingertip-only method, and nod. And always, nobilium metal. Uncle Hi ended up fashioning a dozen more bamboo cutters just to keep up with demand. I sharpened them by hand with a whetstone until my fingers went numb. Some of the girls flinched, others cried, but most didn't care. $1,000,000 was worth the pain, worth the loss. I noticed she only took hair from the waist down. Nothing shoulder length, nothing dyed, no perms, no damage, and she never cut hair shorter than the scalp. She always left a finger's length, enough to say the person still had something left. I asked her once, stupidly, maybe, what she needed it for. She didn't answer, didn't even look at me, just kept wrapping bundles of hair and rice paper one after another, tying them off with that same red string. The smell of wet paper and hair lingered long after she left. 3 days passed like that. We didn't question it, not out loud, but something felt off. The barber shop had never been busier, but I felt this gnawing in my gut that wouldn't go away. Lynn started sleeping with her door locked. Said she had nightmares she couldn't remember. The woman never stayed in one place but always returned by mid-morning, a pale shadow under that long white shawl. I started keeping notes, names of girls who sold their hair, what time they came, what they looked like before and after. I didn't know why, I just needed to do something with the feeling. And then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she didn't show up one morning. The line of women waited until noon, then trickled away. Uncle Hi said maybe she got what she came for. Maybe she was heading to another town. Lynn didn't seem relieved. That night she asked me to check her window locks. I told her she was being paranoid. I should have listened. That night was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums. Even the dogs didn't bark, which is never a good sign in the village. Lynn stayed in her room with the light on and locked her door. I knocked once around 10 just to check. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was low. "I'm fine." She didn't sound fine. I went back to my mat and tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about the way the hair seller touched Lynn's hair. Not like someone buying a commodity, more like someone inspecting parts. I must have dozed off at some point because I remember waking suddenly, heart kicking in my chest. No sound, no lights, just that thick dark that you get in the countryside where the power flickers anytime it rains hard enough. I lay there for a minute. Then I heard it, a slow, dry shk, like something being combed in long strokes. At first I thought it was the wind brushing branches against the window, but it was too steady. No gusts, no rise or fall, just the same rhythm, over and over. It was coming from Lynn's room. I sat up, listening hard, waiting to hear footsteps or the creak of her floorboards. Nothing, just the combing, the same steady shh. I crept out of bed and stepped quietly toward her door. The combing stopped before I reached it. "Lynn?" I whispered. No answer. I tapped the door lightly. "You okay?" Still nothing. I pressed my ear to the door. Just as I did, there was a soft tap on the other side, right against my ear like a knuckle lightly knocking wood. I jumped back. The door creaked open a crack. Lynn peered out. Her face was pale, and her eyes looked glassy, like she hadn't slept at all. She had tied a scarf over her head. "What?" she whispered. "I heard something," I said. "Me too." She opened the door wider. Her bed looked untouched. The covers were bunched in the corner, the pillow lying on the floor. She hadn't slept either. "You heard it too?" I asked. She nodded slowly. It was combing, over and over, but not me. I frowned. "You sure it wasn't a dream?" Her expression hardened. "I don't dream like that." I believed her. Lynn had always been a heavy sleeper, the kind who'd snore through typhoons, but she looked spooked, really spooked. I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. I walked over to her bed and picked up the pillow. It was damp, not sweat, wet. I turned it over and froze. There was a single strand of hair stuck to the fabric, long, black, twisted into a knot at one end. Lynn had shaved her head 4 days ago. "Is this yours?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She stared at it in silence. Then she grabbed the scarf off her head. There was nothing underneath, just bare scalp, like before. "No," she said softly. I threw the pillow aside. The next morning, the electricity returned with the sunrise, flickering back to life in weak pulses. Lynn didn't leave her room. Uncle Hi stopped by briefly to drop off some rice and muttered something about the strange woman not coming back yet. I didn't ask if he missed the money. By noon, we started hearing from others. Mrs. Tam, a heavy-set widow who had sold her hair to the woman on day 2, came into the shop looking pale and sweaty. "I need to ask something," she said, scratching the side of her head. "Have you heard noises at night?" Uncle Hi glanced at me, then nodded slowly. "What kind of noises?" "Brushing, like someone brushing hair, only I have no hair left." She pulled off her headscarf. Her scalp was bare and pink, but she kept scratching the side of it like it itched deep under the skin. She leaned closer. "It's not just the sound, it's the feeling, like someone is pulling it, at night, pulling and combing and knotting, like fingers moving through hair that isn't even there anymore." Uncle Hi blinked. "That's just nerves. You miss your hair. It happens." Mrs. Tam wasn't convinced. "Then how come my pillow's wet every morning? Why is it that I wake up coughing and there's hair in my mouth?" "Yours?" I asked. She hesitated. "It's black, long, not mine anymore." After she left, 3 more women came to the shop. Different complaints, same pattern. One said she felt someone standing beside her bed at night. Never saw anything, but always woke to a cold spot near her cheek. Another said she'd been dreaming of teeth biting through hair, but the hair was underwater and the teeth weren't human. The third said nothing at all, just unwrapped a clump of tangled wet strands from a kitchen towel and asked if we knew anyone who could explain where it came from. She lived alone. Lynn stayed in her room all day. I brought her food, but she didn't touch it. That night, I stayed up reading by the window, ears straining for the slightest sound. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a soft scratching again. This time, it wasn't in Lynn's room, it was in mine. I turned off the light and sat perfectly still. No breathing, no blinking. The sound came from near the foot of the bed, low, dry strokes, not against a head but against the floorboards themselves, the sound of something combing hair that shouldn't be there. I didn't move until dawn. By the next day, half the girls who'd sold their hair had either left town or locked themselves inside. One posted a message in the community group online, just a blurry photo of her bathtub with what looked like wet strands clinging to the inside rim. That's when Lynn found the first real strand. It was early evening, just after she tried to take a nap. She called out to me, voice shaking. I ran into her room and saw her standing near the bed, holding something between her fingers. It was a knot of hair, long, black, soaked. Under the sheet, she said, staring wide-eyed. It wasn't there before. I checked the mattress. The underside was damp. The pillow again soaked on the edge. I looked at her scalp, still bare. "Maybe it's just..." I started. She shook her head and held it out to me. "Smell it." I leaned in. It smelled like river water, rotting leaves, pond scum. something that had been submerged too long and dragged up into the heat. We threw it into the fire pit out back, but the smell lingered on our hands long after. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat beside Lynn's door, holding a kitchen knife, as if that would make any difference. I didn't hear the combing. I heard water, a slow, dripping trickle from somewhere just inside the walls. By morning, Lynn's pillow was soaked again. She didn't say anything when I walked in, just held it up, squeezing it lightly so the moisture ran down her wrist. Her eyes were ringed dark, like she hadn't slept for days. "I didn't dream," she said flatly. "I stayed awake all night. It still happened. I checked the room. The window was latched. No leak from the ceiling, no footprints, no sign of intrusion, but the bedding smelled like the river. That same mixture of algae, mud, and something sour, like old skin." She pushed back her scarf and sat cross-legged on the floor. I stared at her scalp for a long time, not sure if what I was seeing was real. Her hair was growing back. Tiny black shoots, maybe a centimeter long, stood up from her skin, not evenly, clumps here and there, some already curling into knotted twists. "They're wet," she whispered. "I can feel them." I crouched beside her and touched one carefully. It felt slimy. The skin underneath was cold. "You need to see a doctor," I said. "We don't have money for that." "We do now." She gave me a long look. She hadn't touched the cash she got for selling her hair. She tucked it into a drawer and left it there like it didn't belong to her anymore. That day the rain held off, but the sky never brightened. The air hung heavy, like the world was waiting for something. The shop was quiet. No customers, no gossip, no sign of the woman. Around mid-afternoon I heard shouting from the other side of the village. A girl was screaming, one of the teenagers who'd sold her hair on the second day. Her parents carried her to the temple steps. I saw her from across the street. Her head was covered in thin black fuzz, patchy and damp. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and her hands clawed at the air like she was trying to pull something off her skin. "She says it itches under her scalp," someone whispered nearby. "Like worms, like something moving." Her mother sobbed into her sleeves. Her father looked helpless, holding the girl down as she convulsed. A monk came out and tried to chant something, but the girl screamed louder until they had to carry her inside. By sunset, 3 other women had come forward, same symptoms: hair regrowing in damp, matted clumps, itching, headaches. One complained of nausea that came only at night. Another said her ears felt blocked, like water was trapped inside, but no amount of shaking cleared it. One of them showed me her fingernails. The tips were black, not bruised, just black, like something under the skin was staining her from the inside out. I kept checking on Lynn every few hours. The patches on her scalp were spreading. One knot had grown nearly 2 inches and already coiled itself like a leech. "I tried cutting one off with scissors," she said quietly. "It bled." I froze. "You mean your skin?" "No, the hair." I didn't ask how she knew the difference. I tried to contact a doctor online. No one responded. The connection was slow, and even when I typed the symptoms into the search bar, nothing came up that made sense. Fungal infections, maybe, but none that explained the sound of combing or the wet strands left on clean sheets. That night, I decided to try and find the woman. I needed to see if she was still in town, if she had a home, or even a name. The market street was empty. Even the late-night food stalls were closed early. I wandered up and down the alleys, calling out softly, hoping someone would answer. I found her standing near the edge of the road by the old banyan tree. The shawl was the same, draped from her head to her knees, the hem soaked from the last rain. Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers unmoving. She stared at the ground as if waiting for it to open. I approached slowly, half expecting her to vanish like a ghost. She didn't move. "Hey," I said. No response. I stepped closer, circling around until I could see her face in the glow of the streetlight. Her eyes were open, pale. They didn't blink. "You need to tell me what's happening," I said. She said nothing. "People are sick. The girls who sold their hair, they're changing." Still nothing. Her skin looked drier than before, almost cracked near the lips. Her cheeks were hollow. "Was this part of the deal?" I asked, voice rising. "Did you do this to them? What are you doing with their hair?" That's when her eyes finally moved. just a fraction, tilting to meet mine. It felt like I'd been dunked in cold water. I took a step back. Her gaze wasn't angry or threatening. It was blank, like she didn't see me at all, only what was behind me or through me. She raised one hand slowly, and for a second, I thought she might speak. Instead, she turned away and walked into the rice field beside the road. I followed. She moved through the stalks without touching them. The moon cast just enough light for me to make out her form drifting ahead, slower than walking, faster than crawling. We reached the canal at the end of the field. She stood on the edge, staring down at the water. I caught up, chest heaving, sweat rolling down my neck. "Tell me," I demanded. "What is this? What did you do?" She looked at the canal, then at her own hand. Then slowly, too slowly, she raised her shawl just enough for me to see her wrist. It was banded in scars. No, not scars. Stitches. Loose, fraying, black threads, pulled tight through the skin as if holding it together. They ran up her arm, vanishing beneath the fabric. I stepped back. She let the shawl fall and turned to me one last time. Then she knelt by the water, cupped a handful, and poured it slowly over her wrist. The thread soaked it in like cotton. When I got home, Lynn was waiting by the door. Her scarf had slipped back. The patches on her head were now full tufts. The strands hung limp and black, already forming knots at the ends. Her eyes were rimmed red. "Bow," she said. "I think something's inside me." I looked at her scalp again, heart pounding. One of the knots moved, twitched, just slightly. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't, not after watching one of Lynn's knots twitch beneath her skin like something burrowing its way deeper. She sat by the window with her knees pulled to her chest, scarf long forgotten, the half-wet clumps of hair hanging like dead vines around her scalp. I made her tea she didn't drink. We said nothing for hours. She dozed sometime around 4, just for a moment, and then she started choking. It was quiet at first, a breath caught sideways, then a rough cough, then a rasp like something thick was stuck in her throat. I jumped up, grabbed her shoulders. She was clawing at her neck, nails raking across her skin, her mouth wide open but no sound coming out except for that sickening watery gurgle. I pulled her hands away. Her eyes rolled back. That's when I saw it. Her hair, longer now, fuller, had twisted itself around her neck. Not all of it, just a few strands, but enough to constrict. It knotted on its own, coiling tighter like something with purpose, like fingers tightening into a fist. I grabbed the scissors from the shelf and tried to cut through it. It resisted at first, tougher than hair should be, but I hacked until it gave, and the knot snapped loose. Lynn gasped, eyes flooding with tears, and slumped into me, shaking. She threw up on the floor, pale water, river water. I held her until she stopped trembling. Her skin was ice. When I helped her back into bed, I found the pillow damp again. But this time, it wasn't just water. There was mud smeared into the corner, dark, thick, almost clay-like. And beneath it, half buried in the fabric, was something small and brown. I thought it was a root at first. It was a tooth. I didn't tell her. I tucked it into my pocket and tried to wipe the fabric clean with a damp towel. She didn't go back to sleep. By morning, the village was buzzing again. Another girl had been found, dead. This one hadn't been talking much. A quiet, pale woman named Me who lived on the south edge of the village. She was one of the first to sell her hair. Waist length, pure black, worth every dong the woman had offered. Me hadn't complained like the others, hadn't joined in the gossip or come back asking questions. She died in her bathtub. The neighbor found her when the water started dripping through the ceiling. The house stank of mildew and rust. When they pried the door open, they found her slumped beneath the water, eyes wide, lips blue, with long strands of hair crawling up her chest. They said it looked like the hair had grown back while she was under, that it had twined around her arms, her neck, her chest, that it had pinned her in place. Somebody said her hair wasn't even attached to her scalp, that it was growing from her mouth. The monks came to bless the house. The door was sealed. Nobody said much after that. I went to the barber shop, though I knew there wouldn't be any customers. Uncle High sat smoking in the back, looking 10 years older than he did last week. He didn't say anything when I walked in. He just stared through the curtain. "I think we brought something here," I said. He took a drag off his cigarette. "People been selling their hair for generations. Never caused this before. It's not just the hair." He didn't argue. I pulled the tooth from my pocket and set it on the counter. He leaned forward. His fingers hovered, then drew back like he'd touched something hot. "Where did—" "Lynn's pillow." He didn't touch it again. That afternoon, I visited Lynn's room with a bowl of rice and found her sitting on the edge of her bed, trembling. Her hair had grown past her ears now, thick, damp. The roots looked darker than before, almost oily. "I felt it last night," she whispered. "You were asleep." "I wasn't. Not really." She looked up at me, jaw tight. "It was in the room with me." "What was?" She shook her head. "I don't know." But it brushed my face. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I felt strands across my skin, like something brushing the hair away from my eyes, only I don't have any there. I sat beside her. "We're going to fix this." She didn't answer. Later that evening, as the village fell into that same stifling quiet, I stood barefoot in our kitchen, staring at the drain. It made a noise, just for a second, a wet suck, then a slow shk, like something slithering past the pipe's lip. I didn't open the cupboard. I didn't want to see what might be hanging underneath. Instead, I waited until Lynn was asleep, then went outside and walked. I followed the same road as before, past the banyan, through the field, to the canal where the woman had stood. The water was still. No frogs, no crickets, no ripples. But I heard something, low, muffled, like fabric sliding over stone. I looked up the path, and there she was, the woman in white. But she wasn't walking this time. She was kneeling, her shawl draped over her head, her hands pressed flat to the ground as if she were praying. Her fingers moved in slow, rhythmic circles, stroking the dirt, combing it. I didn't speak. I watched. She raised one hand and brought it to her head, then pulled her shawl back just enough for me to glimpse what lay beneath. Her scalp was stitched with long black strands. They weren't part of her. They were sewn into the flesh, looped and threaded and tied tight like fishing lines through meat. They weren't growing from her head. They were being worn. I turned and ran. When I got home, Lynn was sitting in the kitchen, her back to me. Her hair now reached her shoulders. She turned slowly, and for a second, I saw it. Not her face, not her expression, but a strand of black hair winding along her neck like a vein, pulsing once. It slipped beneath her collar. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were wet, not with tears, with river water. Lynn wouldn't speak the rest of the night. She sat at the kitchen table, arms folded across her chest, head bowed under the weight of hair that shouldn't have been there. The strands reached her shoulders now, thick, slick, curling at the ends like vines groping for something. She scratched at her scalp constantly, not with the urgency of pain, but with a slow, mechanical rhythm, like she was mimicking something. I couldn't take it anymore. I left her with a blanket and a bowl of ginger tea and walked into the village with nothing but a flashlight and a name, Old Widow Thoi. She lived alone in the stilt house near the banyan grove, her door always closed unless you had something to offer. Candles, incense, stories. They said she was old enough to remember the French retreat, maybe even the cholera floods, though no one dared ask. I didn't believe in witches, but I believed in the kind of memory that lasted longer than truth. And Thoi remembered everything. I found her exactly where I hoped she'd be, sitting on the raised wooden porch, weaving dried banana leaves into little figures that looked like dolls. She didn't look up when I approached. "I know what you want," she said. I stopped cold. "You've seen her," she said. "She's still combing." I didn't speak. She waved me closer. Her skin was like rice paper, sun-dried and thin, wrapped tight over bones that barely moved. Her eyes were clouded, cataracts thick as milk, but she looked straight through me all the same. "I saw her too," she said, voice like a broom sweeping gravel. "Years ago, When I was a girl, who is she? I asked. She was a bride, Dewey said. A long time ago, before the war, before the cement roads. They called her the bride in the river. She drowned on her wedding day. I waited. She had the longest hair in the province. Everyone knew her for it. She was proud of it. Said she'd never cut it, not even for her husband. But the river didn't care. It pulled her in like a lover, and when they found her body 3 days later, all that hair had wrapped around her throat like a veil. My stomach turned. She was buried with it, we continued. But the hair never stopped growing. That's what they said, even after the grave. The villagers dug her up once a year later to rebury her farther from the river. When they opened the casket, her hair had grown out of her mouth and coiled through the coffin like roots. She spat into the dirt beside her. They say she kept growing, Tui said, looking for what the river took. Now she walks in white and trades gold for what she's lost. Hair, I whispered. Tui nodded. But not just any hair. Black, long, untouched by fire or blade, the kind that still remembers who it belonged to. What does she want it for? To rebuild, she said simply. Each piece she takes becomes part of her. Skin, veins, eyes, flesh stitched from memory. And when she has enough, she stopped weaving and looked up. She'll stop walking, and the one she takes from become hollow, she said. Their essence leaks back into her through the strands, first dreams, then voice, then body, and when they're empty, she drowns them. A breeze stirred the trees behind her, rattling the dry leaves. I stared at her for a long time. Can it be stopped? Only if the final thread is cut before she's whole. My throat tightened. How do you know when she's almost whole? You'll see her without the shawl, she said, when she walks bareheaded under the moon, and her hair no longer trails behind her but grows from her spine like a wedding train. Then it's too late. I swallowed. She's doing this to my cousin, Lynn. Dewey's hands stopped moving. You have to act now, she said, urgency cracking her voice for the first time. Before the hair binds too deep. Cut it? I asked. Not with steel. That won't hold her. She opened a wooden drawer behind her and pulled out a bundle wrapped in red cloth. Inside was a tool I didn't recognize, an old cutting blade made of bone, curved like a sickle. The edge was stained, the handle carved with spirals. Boar tusk, she said, blessed in river ash. It cuts memory. That's what you're cutting, not just hair. I took it. What if it doesn't work? Then it's not memory you're cutting anymore, it's her. I didn't sleep that night. I watched Lynn from the kitchen, the blade hidden under my shirt. She hadn't moved since I left. Her head drooped now, her hair hiding her face. But I could see it twitch, gently, with her breath, like it was moving before she did. I approached slowly. Every step was a wave of nausea. I gripped the tusk handle tight and reached for a thick clump near her shoulder. The moment my fingers touched it, the strand whipped around my wrist. Tight, too tight. It burned. I yanked back and slashed downward with the blade. The hair screamed. Not Lynn, the hair. A wet, shrill hiss that came from inside the knot. It split, severed clean, and the coil fell to the floor, twitching like a severed worm. Lynn gasped, lurching upright. Her eyes snapped open, wild, confused, distant. What? She looked down, saw the clump of black hair writhing at her feet, and screamed. I reached for another strand, but the hair moved faster, pulling back like frightened animals. They recoiled beneath her collar, up behind her ears, down her back, hiding. It was retreating. For now. Lynn wept and clung to me, shaking uncontrollably. I held her until dawn. The blade sat between us like a question no one wanted to answer. The morning after I used the tusk blade, Lynn's hair didn't regrow, at least not right away. The severed strands lay coiled in the kitchen corner like something half dead. I tried to sweep them up, but they stuck to the floor, matted with a thin film of blackish sap that clung to the tile. The whole place smelled like damp straw left out too long. Lynn sat quietly all day, her shoulders slouched forward, hair falling limp over her face like a curtain. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but I caught her once, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, head tilted, combing one hand slowly through the ragged patches that remained. The hair moved with her hand at first, then, I swear to God, it moved before her hand, like it anticipated the stroke. That night, the hair seller did not return to her usual spot in the market square. Not that anyone expected her to, not after the deaths, the strange murmurs, the way people had started to lock their doors before sunset. I heard one old man mutter that the canal was cursed now, that he'd seen something dragging a bundle of hair down the waterline late the night before. But the woman's absence didn't matter anymore. Her presence had already spread. It started with footprints. Around dusk, I went outside to dump the kitchen water. The heat had finally broken, and a soft breeze moved through the trees. For the first time in days, I thought I could smell something clean. Then I saw them. Footprints in the dirt right outside our gate, barefoot, small. The heel barely pressed into the earth, but the toes were long and delicate. They were wet. The soil was still moist where she'd stepped. I followed them. They led across the threshold up the front steps and stopped at the door, but they didn't leave. I checked all around the house. No other tracks, no smear of return. Just those 10 delicate impressions like someone had walked up to the house, stood there, and disappeared. I checked the locks 3 times before nightfall. Inside, Lynn was scratching again. Her scalp had gone red around the temples, the hairline creeping forward like ivy up a crumbling wall. Her eyes looked darker than usual, less afraid, more dull. I stayed awake with the tusk blade across my lap. It was around midnight when I heard it. Not from Lynn's room, from the sink. A soft, slick noise, like wet rope being pulled over metal. I stood and crept toward the kitchen, heart pounding. The sound grew louder. Shh, shh. A slow, dragging slide. Not from the faucet, from underneath, the drain. I flipped the light on. A strand of hair was curled out from the mouth of the sink, trailing down the cabinet face like a snake mid-descent. I stepped closer. The strand twitched, just slightly, like a thread tugged by breath. I opened the cabinet doors. More hair, bundled, tangled, coiled in slow pulsing knots around the U-pipe. Not just caught, growing, curling along the copper, pushing outward through the pipe joints. I slammed the doors shut and jammed the blade through the handle to wedge it closed. The next morning I found similar strands trailing from the bathroom faucet and the shower drain, and once, from the base of the toilet, curling around the porcelain rim. I cut them all, one by one, using the tusk blade because the scissors no longer worked. Every time I tried to use steel, the strands slipped away, recoiling just beyond the blade's reach like they sensed it. By the 3rd day, I didn't bother sleeping. I sealed every drain in the house, blocked every crack with salt, stuffed rags under the doors and rubbed vinegar into the window frames, but the hair still found a way in. One night, I found it crawling beneath the floorboards, just one strand at first, poking up between the seams like a weed through concrete. Then more. Dozens, thin as fishing line, wet as leeches. They grew upward toward Lynn's room. She was already asleep, head lolling on the side of the bed. Her hair was longer now, past her shoulder blades. Her scalp no longer looked like skin. It looked like a bed of worms, glistening and restless, the roots darker than pitch. I woke her gently. She blinked slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. "They're trying to get in," I said. "I know," she whispered. "You can feel them?" She nodded. I showed her the strands under the floor. She didn't flinch, she just stared. Then she said something that chilled me more than anything I'd seen so far. "They're looking for each other." That's when I realized this wasn't random. The strands weren't just reaching toward Lynn, they were reaching toward each other, seeking connection, completion, pieces trying to reassemble something, a body. On the 4th night, I found strands behind the refrigerator. On the 5th, I found them curled inside my pillowcase. And on the 6th, I saw them outside again. But this time, not on the ground, hanging from the roof, dozens of black strands swaying in the breeze like spider silk, draped over the shingles, crawling down the gutters, trailing along the eaves, dripping slowly to the windowsills. I hacked them off one by one. I burned the ends in the stove. The smoke smelled like singed meat and pond scum. When I came back inside, Lynn was waiting. She held up her hand. In her palm was a wet, knotted clump. "It came out of me," she whispered. There was blood on her wrist. I pulled it from under the skin. She turned her head and showed me a fresh slit at the base of her neck, where a thick black root had been forcefully torn free. "I heard it whispering," she said, "calling to something in the walls. That's when I decided to burn the house. But the widow stopped me. I ran to her hut with my mind full of smoke and hair and a body that hadn't stopped growing, and she met me at the door before I even knocked. 'She's nearly done,' she said." I froze. "What do you mean? The spirit, the bride?" "She's almost whole. The hair is gathering now. Each house is a lung, each strand a nerve. Once it reaches her spine, she'll walk." "She already walks," I said. "She came to the house, not as herself," the widow hissed. "Only in pieces. She's still patchwork, still wanting." I swallowed. "How do I stop her?" The widow placed something heavy into my hands, a small pouch of river salt, a coil of rope made from coarse brown reed, and a second blade, this one made of rusted copper, dull at the edge but carved with old thin script. "This binds," she said. "If it touches her spine, she'll rot her spine. When she's whole, she'll have one. You'll see it. It won't look human." I didn't ask what it would look like. I just nodded. Then I asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why Lynn?" The widow's face fell. "She's the last piece," she said. "The final offering. What happens if the hair finds her heart, it's over." The widow told me the last piece of her would be Lynn's heart. I didn't ask what she meant by that. I knew. When I returned home, Lynn was sitting upright in her bed, but she wasn't alone. The hair had grown again, faster than before. It now fell past her waist, slick and heavy like wet rope. Her face was hidden behind a curtain of black strands. She didn't move, didn't speak. I called her name twice, no answer. I moved slowly toward her and noticed something strange. Her body was upright, but her chest wasn't rising. She wasn't breathing. I rushed forward, heart pounding, and shook her shoulders. Her head snapped up sharply, and her hair recoiled around her neck like startled snakes. She blinked once, twice, and then collapsed forward, gasping. "It's getting harder," she whispered. "For what? To come back. We needed to act." I remembered the widow's words. If the hair reached her heart, it would be over. I couldn't wait any longer. That same evening, I brought her to the temple at the edge of the village. An old monk there owed Uncle Hai a favor from years ago. We said it was a cutting ritual for purification, one of those half-forgotten village traditions with enough superstition behind it to pass without question. They laid Lynn on the floor of the prayer hall, her head resting on folded cloth. Her eyes were closed, but not asleep. The monk whispered verses I couldn't understand, and two attendants helped unravel her hair across the tile in coils. There was so much of it, more than could have grown naturally. They used ceremonial shears carved from blackwood, non-metal, blessed, old. As the monk began cutting, I watched Lynn's jaw twitch, then her neck, then her hands. The strands fought it. The first cut went clean, the second snagged. By the third, the hair began bleeding. Dark liquid seeped from the roots, pooling on the floor beneath her. The monk recoiled. One of the attendants cursed and dropped the bundle he was holding. The hair coiled up like a striking cobra and lashed across the monk's wrist. The lights went out. Candles flared, then all at once, extinguished. Lynn screamed. Her body arched. Her back lifted off the mat. Her mouth opened wide, and I heard a voice, not hers, moaning through clenched teeth. The hair writhed in every direction, slithering across the floor, reaching for the monks, the walls, the windows. The others fled. I lunged for the tusk blade hidden under my shirt and slashed downward through the mass wrapping around her arms. The scream stopped. The hair snapped still. Lynn gasped again, her eyes flying open. I dragged her to her feet and out the temple doors. We didn't stop running until we reached the back of the village. That night, I locked us both in the house, salt across every threshold, shears beside my bed, rope at the ready. But it wasn't enough. I must have dozed at some point, because when I opened my eyes, the air had gone dead still. The fan wasn't spinning. No crickets, no frogs. No sound except a faint dragging, a wet, fibrous friction sliding across the floorboards. I turned. Lynn's bed was empty. Her door was open, and her hair was stretched like a rope, slithering out across the hallway, taut as a pulled wire. I ran. She was gone. I followed the trail of hair down the steps and out into the yard, where it carved a black path through the grass. The strands were long, twisted together, stretched toward the river like veins pumping through the soil. I ran barefoot, holding the tusked blade, ignoring every warning scream in my chest. The path ended at the edge of the canal. I saw her. Lynn was standing waist deep in the water. Or, no, she was being held. Her arms were limp at her sides. Her head hung forward. But her hair stood up, lifted, coiling skyward, stretching behind her like wings of seaweed. It trailed up the canal bank, disappearing into the brush. Then I saw her, the hair seller, standing at the water's edge, maybe 10 meters upstream, white shawl soaked, hanging heavy from her shoulders. Her hands were outstretched, palms up, and her fingers trembled with each pulse of the current. Her eyes were wide open, and her hair, if it was hair, flowed around her like shadow caught in the wind, no longer attached to her head, but growing from her spine, her shoulders, her mouth. It reached toward Lynn. I ran screaming into the water. The mud sucked at my legs, cold and deep and thick. I swung the tusk blade at the nearest strand and sliced clean through it. The line recoiled, and Lynn's head snapped upward. Her eyes locked on mine. "Help me," she rasped. Her arm shot forward, but something yanked her back by the neck. The black cords tightened around her chest. I cut again, and again. I tore at the strands until her body collapsed into my arms. She was shivering, whispering something I couldn't hear. The hair seller screamed, a low, watery wail like a body drowning forever. The canal surged. Water poured upward as if sucked toward the sky. The hair spiraled from her back, whipping in every direction. Strands wrapped around tree trunks, tore at the grass, laced through the underbrush like hungry eels. I dragged Lynn out of the canal. Her feet caught on roots. Her skin scraped raw from the rocks, but she clung to me, her body too weak to move. The hair followed. We reached the edge of the banyan grove, and I turned to face it. The spirit's face had changed, no longer hidden in shadow, now pale, stitched, unfinished. One eye was black, the other socket was hollow. Her jaw was held together by strands of knotted hair. Her scalp was patchwork, different shades, different textures, all sewn together, a bride made of strangers. And she wanted Lynn to be the last piece. I raised the blade, but the hair stopped and retreated back into the water, as if waiting. Lynn wept in my arms. "We can't go back home," I whispered. She nodded. I didn't take Lynn home after I pulled her from the canal. We walked barefoot to the widow's house, clothes soaked, hair clinging to our skin like vines. I carried her most of the way. She couldn't stop shaking. The river had left a cold in her bones that heat couldn't reach. The widow opened the door before I knocked. She stared at Lynn, not with surprise, but with the weariness of someone who had seen this coming all along. "She took her into the water," I said. "She would have drowned her." "She didn't want to drown her," the widow replied. "She wanted to wear her." I laid Lynn down on a straw mat. The widow draped her in a dry shawl and handed me a bowl of steaming ginger broth. "I didn't ask what was in it. You said the spirit was rebuilding herself," I said. "That she was using hair, but it's more than that." The widow nodded. "She's not using the hair like cloth," she said. "She is the hair. Every strand she collects is a piece of her. The body you saw, it isn't flesh, it's memory, twisted and bound together. A braid of all the women she's taken. She's hollow inside," I muttered. "A corpse in a wig." "No," the widow said. "Worse, a corpse made of wigs, Every limb is sewn from strangers, their pain stitched into her spine, their last breath curled into her lips. Lynn groaned softly behind me. Her breathing was shallow. "She's dying," I said. "She's fading," the widow corrected. "Being replaced." I turned sharply. "There has to be something we can do." "There is," the widow said, "but you won't like it." She limped across the room and opened an old cedar box. Inside was a folded cloth, stained and stiff, wrapped around something sharp. She unraveled it slowly. Inside was a pair of rusted garden shears. The blades were pitted with corrosion, but they gleamed faintly in the lamplight. "These belong to the midwife who buried the bride," the widow said. "They cut the first lock of her hair after she drowned. Not even her mother dared touch it. These blades were used to seal her coffin, and they were never cleaned." I picked them up. They were cold. "Metal," I said. The widow nodded. "Iron and blood. It's the only thing that severs the root, but I already tried cutting Lynn's hair," I said. "It grows back. You cut the surface. You need to cut the source. What's the source?" Her gaze turned grim. Her spine. I thought of the thing I saw by the river. Its back arched, its hair spilling upward like a cape. I remembered the way it pulsed, the way strands curled into its vertebrae like roots into a tree trunk. "She's almost complete," the widow said. "Once she finishes Lynn, she won't need to hide anymore." "What happens then?" "She'll walk into the river and won't come back out alone." Lynn stirred on the mat. Her fingers twitched. "She said it's hard to stay awake," I said. "That it pulls at her." "It's not sleep," the widow said. "It's harvesting. The spirit is threading itself into her nerves. Soon she won't speak. Then she won't remember who she was. When she looks in the mirror, it won't be her reflection staring back. It'll be the bride's face stitched together from what's left." I tightened my grip on the shears. "Then we stop it before that happens." The widow didn't stop me. She only gave me one last warning. "She'll take your voice if you speak her name. Don't say it, not even once." I returned to the house just before dawn. It looked wrong. The windows were open, the salt lines smeared. The front door swung gently on its hinge. I stepped inside, blade drawn. The hair was everywhere. It hung from the ceiling like jungle moss, draped across chairs, slithered over the counters. Black strands crisscrossed the walls in a thick, matted web. And in the center of it all, Lynn standing. Her back was to me. Her hair spilled around her like a nest, flowing upward from her shoulders and coiling at her feet. She stood perfectly still, arms at her sides. The air was thick and wet. I stepped carefully over the hair 1 foot at a time. Lynn, no response. The hair shifted. Slowly her head turned. Her eyes met mine. They were black, not dark, not dilated. Black, solid and wet. Like 2 inkstones pressed into her face, her mouth moved. But the voice that came out wasn't hers. It rasped like riverbed silt dragging over bone. Almost ready, I raised the shears. The hair shrieked. Dozens of strands shot toward me, whipping across my arms, slicing the skin in tiny burning cuts. I lunged forward, swinging the blades toward her back. The strands recoiled, but only for a moment. Then they opened, and I saw it. Her spine, not bone, not muscle, a braid. A thick, pulsating rope of black knotted hair, threaded from the base of her skull down to her hips. It writhed under her skin, twisting slightly, feeding on her. I swung the shears. The blade bit deep. She screamed. The house shook. The hair recoiled violently, slapping at the walls, tearing holes through the ceiling. The floor cracked beneath our feet. I grabbed Lynn as the braid snapped loose at the base and pulled her from the room. We stumbled outside into the dirt, gasping for air. Behind us, the house collapsed inward, hair dragging itself back into the earth like worms into soil. But I knew it wasn't over. I carried Lynn to the widow's hut after the house collapsed. She didn't speak the whole way. She only pressed her face into my chest, and I felt the shallow rise and fall of her breath against my ribs, thin as thread. The widow let us in without a word. Lynn lay curled on the floor mat, her hair finally still, though not gone. The shears had worked, for now. "She'll return tonight," the widow said. "This time she'll take shape." I nodded. "She's coming for me now," Lynn whispered, her voice like dry wind. "I hear her. Behind my eyes. She won't get you," I said. That night I cut my own hair. It wasn't long, just a few inches. I'd kept it cropped short since I was 16, but I used the tusk blade to trim it close to the scalp, wrapping the strands tightly in white cloth. I tied the bundle with red string, the same kind the woman had used for every trade. Then I waited. The widow had drawn a map in the dirt with the end of her cane, the river bend, the path through the banyan grove, the place where the reeds grew high and the trees stopped blocking the moon. That was where the spirit fed, where the hare dragged itself to nest and grow. She handed me a bundle before I left. "Salt," she said. "River salt, not kitchen. Throw it only when she touches you." I nodded again. "And the blade?" I lifted the old shears. They were heavier than they looked, cold even in the heat. "Cut her spine," the widow said. "What if I miss? Then you'll feed her too." I walked through the fields just after midnight. The moon was sharp enough to cast shadows. The sky was cloudless, no wind, no sound. Even the frogs were quiet. I followed the edge of the canal until I reached the bend, where the trees parted and the water pooled dark and thick between two steep banks. There, I waited. I placed the bundle of my hair on the ground, and I knelt beside it. I didn't call out. I didn't light a lantern. I just listened to the reeds whispering, the trickle of water behind me, the faint scratching sound just beyond the tree line. And then, combing, slow, deliberate, shk, the same rhythm I'd heard outside Lynn's room, only now it was louder, closer, no longer hiding. A figure stepped from the shadows. She wore the same white shawl, but it no longer looked like cloth. It clung to her like old skin, wet and frayed, stitched with threads of hair. Her arms hung low, fingers trailing at her knees. Her nails were black. She stared at the bundle, and then at me. I didn't flinch. She approached slowly, dragging one bare foot behind her, spine curled slightly to the left. As she moved into the moonlight, the shawl slipped. Her head was bald, except for the strands sewn in at angles, some in rows, some crisscrossed. Her scalp was pale and pocked with holes where hair had once been pulled free. The stitches that held her together pulsed slightly. She knelt beside the bundle. She reached out. I waited until her fingers brushed the cloth. Then I threw the salt. It hit her face like fire. She screamed, a bubbling, wet sound, like lungs filled with river mud. Her head snapped up and her mouth opened far too wide. Hair erupted from her throat. I jumped back and swung the shears. The first cut missed. She rose from the ground in one unnatural motion, legs dangling, hair lifting her upward like ropes on a marionette. Her arms stretched unnaturally long. Her face twisted into a snarl made of seams. The strands lashed at me. One wrapped my wrist. I gritted my teeth and let it pull me closer, closer, until I saw it. The braid down her back, thick, knotted, twitching, the same as Lynn's, but longer, denser, a spine woven from hundreds of strands. I drove the shears into it. They caught, stuck, and then sank with a sickening snap. The spirit convulsed. Hair erupted in every direction. She flailed once, twice, and let out a scream that turned to liquid midair. Her body split open, not with blood, but with hair. It spilled out like guts, black, knotted, crawling. I fell back, shielding my face as the strands whipped past me, snapping at the air like dying snakes. They turned inward, collapsing, wrapping around her, devouring her own shape. The stitches unraveled, the scalp peeled back. The braids split in half and fell apart like rotted rope, and she sank, first her arms, then her face, then the last patch of scalp. The canal bubbled and stilled. The shawl floated briefly on the surface, then sank too. Silence. I stood, bleeding from the wrist where her hair had wrapped me. The shears were gone, dragged into the mud, but I didn't care. It was done. The next morning I returned to the river with a can of fuel and a bundle of dry kindling. The villagers stayed away. Word had spread. about the hair, the spirit, the screaming in the night. No one asked me what happened. No one came to help. But I saw curtains shift and eyes peer through cracked shutters as I passed. Let them watch. I found the spot where she fell. The reeds were matted and black. The water was low. I stepped into the mud and dug with my hands, past the roots, past the slime, until my fingers touched what remained of her. A tangled mass of hair, not floating, anchored, buried like it wanted to grow back. I pulled it free. It writhed weakly in my grip, twitching in pulses, but I didn't hesitate. I carried it to the fire pit I'd built on the riverbank and dropped the mass in. I poured the fuel slowly, then struck a match. It didn't scream this time. It hissed. The fire caught fast, and the hair curled inward as it burned, crackling, shriveling, releasing a stench like rotted silk and dead fish. The knots twisted tighter as they crisped, then fell apart into black flakes. No bones, no blood, just ash and smoke. I didn't speak. When the fire died down, I scraped the remains into an old clay jar. I walked back to the river and poured the ashes into the water, letting the current carry them downstream. She was gone, not sealed, not slumbering, gone. When I returned to the widow's hut, Lynn was sitting upright. She looked thinner, paler, but alive, and finally herself. Her hair had fallen out overnight, every strand. It lay in soft clumps on the mat around her. Some still pulsed faintly, like twitching worms in a drying field. The widow swept them up and burned them too. By the third day, the others began to recover. The girl who'd scratched her scalp raw stopped seeing knots in her pillow. The widow who coughed up strands from her throat began to eat again. No more seizures, no more dreams of combing, no more damp footprints by their doors. The village never spoke of it again, not out loud, but they stopped cutting their hair for a long time, even the men, especially the men. No one sold to strangers, no one sold at all. I rebuilt our house over the next few weeks, slowly, carefully. No mirrors this time, no steel piping, just wood and concrete, plain and silent. Lynn helped when she could. She kept her head shaved for a while, said it felt lighter, cleaner. Then, one day, she let it grow back, just a little. She asked if I still had the widow's tusk blade. I told her no. I'd buried it where the braid fell. She smiled, but didn't ask me to dig it up. She didn't need it anymore. On the final night of the Ghost Festival, after the last lanterns had floated downriver and the last offerings had burned to smoke, I returned to the bank one last time. I carried a small bundle in my hand, my own hair, just a few strands, wrapped in paper, tied with red string. I placed it gently by the edge of the water and watched it for a long time. Not because I thought she would come back, but because I knew what it meant. Hair is memory, hair is essence, and some memories deserve to rest. I didn't speak, didn't light a candle. I turned and walked home in silence. Behind me, the current carried the bundle gently downstream. It didn't sink, but it didn't come back either. Let no one sell what they cannot take back. Let no one forget what they leave behind. Let no one answer the combing at night. The hair seller is gone, but the river still remembers, and so do I.